Thanks. I tasted the chili. The chili is very much there. Hey,
Imagine yourself as noble and godly and act on this imagination, says Subramanya Bharati. Imaginations reflects the vision of higher and noble life that could serve as a ladder where man can climb. Dear participants, I can understand after a break you seems to be very enthusiastic and very healthy, and I take it as a pleasure and honor. But this is an academic forum, and we are supposed to maintain silence and academic dignity. So let us listen. Let me invite Professor Prakash Chandra Pradhan, Professor of English at Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi, is here to talk on nation and narration in Indian fiction in English till 1950. Please, sir, we'd like to hear your talk.
good afternoon to all the delegates, students, and the organizers. At the outset, I will express my sincere thanks to the university, faculty of the university, more specifically Professor Gavahar, the convener, and the collaborators, Professor Marks, and the other collaborator, B.G. Gupta, for inviting me to talk and have interaction of my views, to share my views. Okay. Today, actually, I wanted to make our presentation, but I will not do that. And yes. I will take the portion, a small portion of this seminar, Nationhood and Nationalism, a discourse on Indian English literature in 1925. The chairman of this session, Professor Sajid, and my dear friends, so let me start now. Narration of nation in literature has drawn the attention of creative writers and scholars for a long time. Nation as a concept refers to a large body of people united by common descent, history, culture, and language, inhabiting a particular country. Nation state is a political unit where the state and nation are congruent. It is a more precise concept than a country, since a country does not need to have a predominant group. The nation state is a territorially bounded sovereign, that is a state, ruled in the name of a community of citizens who identify themselves as a nation. Nationhood is the state of being identity. Nation is the state of identity. Sorry, nationhood is the state of being a nation or a large group of people united by common language, culture, and economic life. National identity is therefore not a unitary concept, it is rather pluralistic. India is a nation where people of different religions, cultures, languages, castes, and communities live together. All caste and clan boundaries cannot disappear. They are the people's support system. Within those boundaries, people are beginning to have a great sense of themselves. Discourse of Indian nation discuss its complex situations in relation to complex pluralistic ideologies nationalism, which is a Western cultural formation, so I will discuss that idea later. Formation played a role in uniting the diverse ethnic and racial groups during anti-colonial movement. This lecture, in the perspective of this seminar, deals with three components, namely problematization of the discourse of nation, the emergence of Indian fiction in English in the 19th century, and narration of nation in serious Indian fiction in English during the 19th and first half of 20th century. So I will take 7 to 8 novels very briefly. I will discuss them, just relating to the aspect of nation and nationalism in those novels. Problematic the discourse of nation in reference to certain key thinkers such as Tagore, Anderson, Pastor Chatterjee, Aurobindo, Gandhiji, Nehru, B.R. Ambedkar, Ranjit Guha, Franz Fanon, Ashish Nandi, Edward Said, Umike Bhabha, Ernest Renan, Timothy Brennan, Chandra Chatterjee, and some others, we understand that the idea of Indian nation should be considered in the perspective of polyphony of its people spread over the entire Indian territory and abroad. So, moreover, the concept of nation should not be contained should not be in contrast to the international interest. National consciousness, not nationalism, as Franz Fanon has said, can only lend an international dimension to a national culture. So here it says national consciousness, not nationalism. That is very important. So we may love our country, but at the same time, we should not hate other countries and other people, other cultures. Nationalism should therefore be a pluralistic rather than unitary. The second part of the lecture is therefore to be second part of the lecture in reference to path of modern India, Orientalist policy of education, of the British rule in the 18th century, Macaulay's Winners of Education, Lord Bentinck's English Education Act 1835, the teaching of English language and literature to the Indians, and the Bengal Renaissance will discuss the emergence of Indian English novel in colonial British India in the 19th century. So in the third part of the lecture, we will refer to a few Indian novels in English of 19th and 20th centuries, more specifically the first half of 20th century up to 1950. It is the scope of the seminar. Uh, yes. So in 19th century, we will refer to very briefly the novels, A Journal of 48 Hours of the Year and 45 by Kesidar, The Republic of Odisha by Kesidar, and then Ankur, Kesidar again, and Bankim Chandra Chatter's Anand Mart. So in 20th century, we may refer to Arun Chago's The Home and the World, Ghar Bahere, and Kantupla Radharao, Untouchable Monica Danan, Waiting for the Mahatma. I don't know whether we will be able to cover because I was told to cut short the lecture because we are already late. Okay, no problem. Then very briefly, I will refer to the three parts of the lecture. Anyway, this is the abstract of this lecture, and then briefly I will go to. Okay. So now, promoting the discourse of nation. Huh? Okay. The negative effects of colonial oppression give post-colonialism its anti-colonial perspective. Its obvious manifestation reached a climax during the independence struggle and the achievement of political freedom. The historical fact of colonial oppression still exists under different forms in contemporary society. It was influenced by the ideologies of colonialism. Tagore talks about the paradoxical nature of nation. I'm referring to, like, I'm quoting him in his essay, Nationalism, he says, while the spirit of the West marches under its banner of freedom, the nation of the West forges its iron chains of organization, which are the most relentless and unbreakable that have ever been manufactured in the whole history of man. The Western concept of nature, which is critically examined by Tagore, and this is the that kind of concept is really unbreakable, and we cannot accept to all the ideas of Western concept of notion. So, this today in India, the evils of caste system and poverty perpetuate the process of decolonization. C.V. Davis understands that countries and people have become effectively decolonized to various political, commercial, and military operations and interests. Tagore disapproves of such an organized mechanical power of the nation, with its emphasis on strength and efficiency, undermining the idea of human creativity and diversity in his nationalism. So, in his novel Countdown, Amitabh Ghosh points out the issue of a nation state's appropriation of its people within the folds of its organized ideologies. India as a nation has often been a contested notion and conceptualization. Partha Chatterjee holds India seems to be a paradigmatic example of that very modern phenomena. An imaginary community which is funded by Benedict Anderson, whereby large numbers of people came together to constitute the political and cultural entity known as the nation. So he further explains that nationalism in India is a derivative European nationalism, a different discourse, yet one that is dominated by another. So, however, the nation state of India today is a recent construct, a result of historical accidents and political transformations that occurred over the 19th and 20th centuries. Despite the relative newness of India, the modern nation it has, however, been a home to various peoples, communities, cultures, language, and religions. So going back to colonial and pre-colonial times, we can also have the glimpses of nationalism. In the 3rd century BC, the emperor also ruled over the entire kingdom of Bharat. Referring to Mughal times, we understand that the rulers ruled over the land across the Indus River and called it Hindustan. So the historical perspective. And then later this region became the cultural center of both the Hindus and Muslims. Sudip Kabira considers that India is not an object of discovery but of an invention. It was historically instituted by the nationalist imagination. India seems to be a paradigmatic example of that very modern phenomena, an imagined community whereby large numbers of people come together to constitute that political and cultural entity known as the nation. Though they will never meet or even hear of each other, in the minds of each lives the image of their communion. So I'm putting Anderson here. The origin of Indian nation traces back to the idea of freedom. Liberation movements are influenced by the concept of nation. Self-assertion is a vital tool for surviving among nations of the world. That is why Amitabh Ghosh implicitly brings out the idea that bomb is symbolic of political oppression and national pride. So, due to the urge to dominate, the colonizer was scaling down the colonized economically, socially, psychologically, and culturally. Power systems were active for political oppression. So, here Ambedkar says and holds that nationalism is at once a fellowship for one's own and an anti-fellowship for those who are not, who do not belong to that nation. So various communal uprisings based on religion were forcing the Hindus to uphold their identity during the 19th century. Ashish Nandi posits the 19th century reforms like Swami Dayananda, Sri Aurobindo, and Swami Vivekananda tried to instill in the Hindus a sense of community as Hindus and as a sense of history as community. This sense of Hinduism had been a challenge to the invasion by Western values of Indian culture. The dominant Indian culture has the ability to observe the culture and way of its invaders, incorporating them as part of its own religion and way of life. Before independence, anti-colonialism in the form of rebellion against an imperialistic nation was a form of protest which formed the basis of nation national construction. All the strands of this rebellion were gathered up into an ideological unity. Democracy in India is protest driven. The ethnic and religious minorities protest against any singular definition of nation. The politically marginalized groups protest inadequate representation in government policies. Numerous insurgencies all over the country relate the rebel to war for independence at the sub-national level, which the dominant national ideology has been unable to either outwit or neutralize. Very often there is a debate that India is not one nation, there are so many nations in India, cultural nationalisms, regional nationalisms. So that is there. So yes, imagine communities, Anderson's holds post-colonial nation states have been modeled on colonial patterns. As the native intellectuals are trained in the Western culture and values. So Partha Chatterjee, in his Nation and its Fragments, talks about formation of Indian nation. He says nationalism is a nation, a non-European context. Nationalism in the non-European context was historical fused with colonial Christian. The nation may partially depend on the Western ideas in the matters of politics, science, and economics for modernization. Nationalism as a cultural sentiment should be fused with emotional attachment to a politically organized entity. Nationalism includes materialism and spiritualism in Indian context. So Ranjit Goa, who has talked about the sovereign struggles, he is a peasant nationalist. To him, the dominant ideology of Indian nation cannot hold good to of everybody. So therefore, the subaltern struggles are quite different from the national movements in the Western culture. So these subaltern struggles are based on regional needs and interests of the people concerned. So which have richness of cultural diversity. The nation state is a political discourse with an authoritarian stand to be imposed by the nation state. So, um, the political entity is thought to be the nation, but the cultural focus, so which constitute the different diverse cultures in relation to the different kinds of people, languages, and regions. So that is very often ignored. So therefore, I am problematizing. I am not giving any opinion. Rather, so I just focus how there are so many problems in formulating a specific Indian national ideology. Hanan, in the Race of the Ark, who is a supporter of this anti-colonial movement, he also talks about this aspect. He says national consciousness should have an international dimension. National culture, the collective thought process of people, should be at the heart of liberation struggle. National consciousness, not nationalism, can only give the people a nation an international perspective, an international dimension. To cite this post-colonialism, post-nationalism is post-nationalism that has also international perspective. So anyway, Gandhi has also talked about nation, Nehru, and others. And yes, Gandhi says in his Hind Swaraj and experiments truth. So, like Aurobindo Gandhi's idea of nationalism is rooted in moral and ethical principles. He wanted self-rule by the method of satyagraha and non-violence. Hind Swaraj, his political manifesto is talking about the moral rigidity in the context of national objectives. So, okay, problematizing some of the interests which I just discussed. So, we understand that um, the idea of India is very complex. It is not a simple concept. So, therefore, the concept of the Indian nation should be considered in the perspective of polyphony of its indigenous people spread over the country and abroad. So the diaspora and indigenous writers have their own formulations about India as a nation and culture. As everything is in a flux, the traditions of a nation are also subject to changes by the passage of time. So reconstruction of one's homeland is subjective. As discussed earlier, Palo and Sai view that anti-colonialism should emphasize the concept of an open-minded global community. So this is the first part of the lecture. I just very briefly refer to some of the thinkers. In the second part, I will also briefly discuss the idea of emergence of Indian literature and Indian English novel, more specifically Indian English novel and novel in 19th century. Novel and narration of nation in fiction are often linked. Timothy Brennan therefore articulates nations then are imaginary constructs that depend for their existence on an apparatus of cultural fictions in which imaginative literature plays a decisive role. So Priyamanda Gopal finds that the rise of nation states and the flowering of the genre have coincided across cultural contexts, setting aside the vexed question of when the novel as a literary entity can be said to have begun. So in this part of lecture, yes, I will refer to the birth of modern India after the war of Plassey. So there was birth of India. So after yes, the East India Company defeated the Nawab of Bengal in the Battle of Plassey in 1757, thereby facilitating the emergence of the British India. So after promulgating the India Act of 1784, the British Crown took over political control of Bengal as well as the Bombay and Madras presidencies to check the power of East India Company. The region, British India, became the site of struggle for control between the between the declining Mughal Empire, the Marathas, and the British, yes, and the British, resulting in the birth of modern India. So, with the new maps reflecting Britain's interest and dominion, the subcontinent was seen as an actual region in a meaningful geographical entity. This imperial territory would eventually become the site of anti-colonial and nationalistic struggle, um, facilitating the emergence of Indian English novel, which narrated the idea of modern Indian nation. So, yes, in this context, I will refer to two British philologists, William Jones and Nathaniel Alnett, um, because they had done a great contribution to Indian literature, Indian nationalism. Okay, the first phase of British rule in India, late 18th century, was Orientalist in its education policy, combining the initiation of the West to the vast literary treasures of the East and the reintroduction of the natives to their own cultural heritage, represented as being buried under the debris of foreign conquest. Scholars like British philologists are William Jones and Nathaniel Halmet learned Sanskrit and Persian and undertook research into classical literary traditions of the Indian subcontinent. All this was central to the colonial states' acquisition of knowledge and information about those whom it governed. But in the early part of 19th century, the situation changed because the English um, wanted to introduce their um, education policy. English, they wanted to Englishise the British India. The nation became the privileged category for demarcating larger political entities and the cultural groupings. The paradox is that despite the newness as political entities, the nations see themselves as possessed of great antiquity, with commercial, uh, with immense past and instigated their natural history. Nation statehood status was, however, not granted to them. It was essential to have a history for inclusion in the club of nations. All cultures and civilizations were not considered as they deemed not to possess history. G.F. Hegel, the German philosopher, in his lectures on the philosophy of world history, argued that world history found its highest expression in European concepts of reason, freedom, and the state. Lacking these concepts, China and India were outside world history. So, though India had a treasure of spiritual achievement of profound quality, in the opinion of Hegel, had no history. This influenced the colonial discourse, which justified regarding uncivilized people as not entitled to the same rights. Indians were branded as uncivilized people, and therefore they had no right to certain things, modern things. Okay. Another um, historian, British historian, of course, the hegemonic historian James Mill, he had written 10 volumes of history books, a history of British India. So, so he argued that India, the Hindus, which includes the Hindus, is a false claimant to nationhood because its claim to antiquity and historical records are fabricated. There is no point in reading the Hindu legends because they present a mass of unnatural fictions in which a series of real events by no means be traced. The fabrication of the Hindus are in poetry, and the language of poetry, being passionate, cannot be the vehicle for historical truth. Mill therefore dismisses William Jones' admiration for the Hindu Sanskritic tradition. As a result, there would be arguments whether British India in the colonial times would adopt Oriental education or English education. So they decided to to make India Englishized. So then, as all of us know, the winners of Macaulay. So where he says, whoever knows that language has ready access to all the vast intellectual wealth which all the wisest nations of the earth have created and hoarded in the course of 90 generations. It may safely be said that the literature now extant in the language of is so far is so far is of having greater value than all the literatures which 300 years ago were extant in the languages of the world together. This is the argument of Macaulay, and therefore he says, but actually the intention of Britishers was to create some certain class of people who are Indian in scheme, but then um, but in behavior, in thought patterns, there will be the English. So the history of colonialism also opposed the history of colonial subjects. Engagement with the researchers, the famous uprising of 1857, which generated a myriad sensational English novels, was despite its undoubted large scale, no exception, armed revolt was endemic in all parts of early colonial India. At the same time, collaboration was also an element of colonial rule as native subjects engaged with the new power structure in their own self-interest. They occupied lower level administrative posts, participated in commercial ventures, and enrolled themselves in educational institutions. Colonial policy and education shifted and changed in relation to the response to its subject who get the ideas of their own and how they could benefit from new education national initiatives, including the English education. So the yes, So I'm referring to that. What Michael has said, a class of women be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. Okay. So that is how they introduced the English education in the 19th century, beginning of the 19th century. And this English education was a great factor in revitalizing and bringing in the Bengal Renaissance. Okay, Bengal Renaissance. So there, yes, the intellectual intelligentsia, the Bengal intelligentsia is a class of people who were bilingual, native middle class, Hindu middle class, and in 793, uh, the British introduced permanent settlement, and the rich people of Bengal, they came to Calcutta, though they had vast property in villages, and this class of wealthy people, they came to engage in politics and also literature. So both the things, and they were known as the new urban elite, Bhadraloko, respected people. Okay, they were branded like that. In 1817, there was the establishment of Hindu College of Calcutta, an institution of English Western learning along with the Orthodox Hindu hierarchy. So that means English values, English education, and but the Indian values will not be given up here in this institution. So Vasudhara Bakshi says there is an integration of Anglicism and Orientalism in this institution. The idea for Renaissance, yes. So because of this Renaissance, the Hindus, the middle class Hindus, the intellectual, so the middle class realized that India has a vast civilization and a great culture, but therefore they have to counter this. And how to counter? So that therefore these novels that we will discuss very briefly, of course. So we will go to that because there is no time. And Henry Delogio, a young Hindu lecturer who spearheaded the movement of this Bengal, the young Bengal movement, and Michael Madhusudan Datta, his student, was also a great poet, and he also contributed a lot. And this power of middle class in colonial India based less on economic power. They were rich people, but it was less in economic power, more on their abilities as cultural entrepreneurs. They derived the resources from Indian culture, Indian heritage, Indian tradition. So that is their fight to indigenize our Indian nation. They have the ability to define history, modern and Indian. Because Hegel argued that Hegel and that Mill, the British historian, they said that India had no ability to write in prose. They have no history. So therefore, these people wrote in prose, and they wrote the history of India also. Another young man, Kasi Prasad Bose, a young Hindu scholar, wrote an essay attacking Mill's history and defending Hindu chronology. He discovered India is a nation with its own history, whose histories and the bark of novel so coincided, and it was a response to intellectual dominance of world history. Actually, this was a response to intellectual dominance of world history, a particular paradigm of storytelling to another, rather than from fantasy to reason and myth of history. Because they challenge us, that is why, yes, I'm putting here Priyamada Gopal, so he has written a very good book on Indian English novel. So and she says, and so it was that the novel emerged in 19th century India with a profound interest in the writing of history and relatability in articulating a sense of nationhood. So this concern was particularly visible in the Anglophone novel written at the time, with a mainly European reader and interpreter in mind. Um, Okay, so this, as we shall see, at no stage was such a paradigm shift either complete or decisive. Repressed elements, wonder, fantasy, poetry would emerge through the gaps in even many solidly realistic works and of course over time. Magical realism, the bringing together of the fabulous and real would come to be one of the most celebrated achievements of the Indian tradition. Prose realism, the novel, all were appropriated and reworked rather than simply limited. And so this is I come to the conclusion of the second part of the lecture, and now I will read to some novels very briefly because we have no time. Uh, okay, just I will read it to and I was told. Okay. Then this is the third part, so where I discuss some of the novels that I told you. So 8 novels I had chosen, but I will not reflect on those novels. Let's read, of course, I will finish in 5 10 minutes. It will take more time, but I'm not going to those details. So read the one paragraph. Because of the time schedule, I was given 1 hour, so that is why everybody has prepared the paper. Anyway, the first Indian novel in English, a journal of 48 hours of the year 1945 by Kayash Chandra Datta, published in 1835, much before post-colonialism took a formal step as a theoretical practice. This short narrative text represents the injustice of subaltern oppression and prophetically uses the word subaltern in its present postmodern sense. This short narrative brought out the multi-tensions of the Bengal-British cultural negotiation. It was simultaneously implicated in the process of indigenous identity formation and in the formulation of subaltern consciousness. The text not only suggests armed conflict as a tool of opposing colonialism, it is also prophetic in its um, use of the concept of the subaltern as far back as 1835. So about 150 years before subaltern studies were formally started in India. So okay, so this is the um, novel, and I will just refer to other uh, 3 novels. Please give me some time because otherwise it will be incoherent what I wanted to tell, so that will remain incomplete. So just yes, one thing I will just say. I'm going to the last part. That is where I'm searching. So Indian literature is not a theoretical coherent category. So every book written by an Indian inside the country or abroad is part of a thing called Indian literature. It is said by J. Omar, all of us know. It comprises many different languages and literary traditions. This literature has emerged from within shifting cultural boundaries over the centuries. The commercial outfit East India Company defeated the Nawab of Bengal. So and then modern India was born, and we also found that in 1835 the novel, the first novel was written, and Sunkur is another novel, a tale of the Indian mutiny of 1857. In contrast to the imagined narrative of Odisha, the Republic of Odisha, I am not going to that novel. I am going to a novel of 1857. Sunkur is, however, a full-fledged novel of rebellion, written by an Indian in relation to Sipai Mutiny of 1857. The opening chapters relate to the issues of India and Hindustan. The plot revolves around the question who will rule India if the British are overthrown. So in the early sections, the novel follows the structure of a mutiny novel depicting treacherous and cowardly natives plotting the downfall of their British overlords. The narrative gradually shifts towards the misdeeds of the British. The Englishmen in India do not deal in common with races they have conquered. There is no sympathy on one side and no confidence on the other. Two British fugitives, Bernard and Mackenzie, with their insolence, hypocrisy, and cunningness, betray the trust of their rural host by raping the Indian woman who has given them shelters in her home. So it is horrifying to yes, to note that the racial logic is shown to justify the rape. They say there is no harm in that when the woman is a nigger, it would be a different thing if she were a European. So this kind of thing. So I'm not understood referred to that novel very briefly, and coming to the conclusion. Sankur, this novel. Sankur remains uncomfortable while he thinks of the sufferings of the masses. The Havildar, however, suggests the old mother raped to go back to Surajpur, so her home, and forget the bloody doings. Sankur also wants to withdraw from the rebellion and thinks of returning to the village. So the private story of Sankur and the story of the mutiny are disentangled. That is how the novel ends. This is the novel. So I was referring to. So and then I am coming to Anand Mathur. Very briefly I will tell. So because of misrule of the British widespread feminist and economic degradation in the first decades of 9th century, there had been large-scale resentment and criticism against the British rule. Various provincial groups united themselves into a more well-defined nationalism under the larger All India umbrella. Subsequently, in 1885, Indian National Congress was established. In 1905, there was a significant demand for Swaraj, or self-rule. The novel had now established itself in Bengali, Marathi, and other Indian languages and provided a site for exploring the meanings of national culture, and nationhood, and national identity. The most important novels in India in a language during this period, from Chandu Menon, Malayalam, and Govardhan Ram Tripathi, Gujarat, and to Bengalis, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee and Rabindranath Tagore, were educated in English and were deeply influenced by the European novel. Both Anand Math and Anand by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee and The Home and the World by Rabindranath Tagore, originally written in Bengali and later translated into English, explore India and Indian nationalism. So Anand Math and Home and yes, World. So these two novels, perhaps I will do, and after that, if you permit, I will go to the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. So where I want to refer to Anthopra, Markaz Anand's Untouchable, and after also waiting for the Mahatma. Maybe I will skip that because I will just finish here. Okay. Yes. Anand, so please give me 5 minutes. I will finish these two novels. Huh? Okay. So Anand Math returns to the mode of fictional history we encountered in Sankar, imagining a rebellion against a tyrannical rule, but at a careful historical distance. In Sankar, anti-national rebellion against tyrannical rule was a response to specific incidents and injuries with only a national invocation. Hindustan, Bankim's novel Anand Mathur, however, delineates Bankim's novel Anand, however, delineates a visual India that becomes iconic. India, Mother India, an enchanting image more beautiful and glorious than Lakshmi. I'm quoting from the text, Lakshmi or Saraswati, who is she? The mother, Who is the mother? The monk answered, "See whose children we are." Priyamanda Gopal observes, drawing an existing Hindu conception of the Mother India Earth as a female and as a goddess, the image of Mother India became a powerful point for Indian nationalism and freedom struggle, and a persistent theme in literature and popular culture in India. So Anandamati is said about 100 years before its time uh, uh, publication of its writing during a famine in 770 when Bengal was not under British rule and the region of Birbhum was under the rude and incompetent Muslim ruler Mir Jafar. So who was supported by the British. In the first, a band of monastic sons of India, they vowed to liberate their mother from the bondage. So Mahendra, Jivanand, Santi, and many others joined their hands and lead a massive uprising against the Muslim ruler. Subsequently, the Muslim rule was destroyed, but Hindu rule has not been established. The British are powerful enough to counter the Hindu movement. The anthem Vande Mataram, the national song that we say now, the Vande Mataram inserted into the novel's narrative is a powerful assertion of militant nationalism. Chatterjee rebels fight in the name of a Hindu mother nation to root out the Muslims completely. Priyabandha Gopal posits that the Bhadraloka are respectable Bengal intelligentsia of Bengal began to search for their national identity in the mirror of Englishness. They turned to a presumed indigenous Aryan or Hindu heritage as the true core spirit of the Indian nation. Now degraded and overlaid by centuries of Islamic rule. So now I am coming to the next novel by Rabindranath Tagore, Home and the World. Very briefly, I will answer. One minute, because that is the last. And so I will just go to the last one. Okay, I'm coming to this. Uh, yes, Home and the World is a key text. Conclusion. Okay, key text, experimental in form, structured as a series of interwoven monologues, drawing also on the author's capabilities as a dramatist and poet. It is Tagore's controversial and critical engagement with nationalism that makes the text as having continuing relevance. Tagore is quite sympathetic to the character Nikhil. There are three characters, important characters: Nikhil, Bimla, and Sambit. Multi-perspective novel. That is why I'm referring to it, and I stopped it written in 1916. I just thought the 20th century. But actually, the lecture has been prepared up to 1950. Keeping in mind of this seminar, okay. But I'm not going to that. Okay. Tagore is quite sympathetic to the character Nikhil, although he gives the three protagonists almost equal voice and the time. Nikhil articulates his author's own disquiet with militant nationalism. Swadeshi has been figured here as destructive and tyrannical and therefore a derivative of the discourse of violence of colonial power itself. Tagore philosophically utters, while delineating his lectures in Japan and United States of America during 1916 after getting Nobel Prize in 1913. So even though from childhood I had been taught, he says in a lecture, I had been taught that idolatry of the nation is almost better than reverence for God and humanity. It is my conviction that my countrymen will truly gain their India by fighting against the education which teaches them that a country is greater than the ideals of humanity. So if our country people think that we will get our freedom by thinking that our country is more important than the humanity, then I don't want that kind of nation freedom. That is what he said. That he end up that in that novel that in that lecture that he has said. Okay, the so Nikhil is a true. Yes, I'm coming to that last part. Sandeep here symbolizes muscular masculinity, militant nationalism as a derivative discourse of colonialism from the West. And he embodies particularity in contrast to Nikhil, a true indigenous alternative and universal in its humanism, not to hate others. Tagore's critique of militant nationalism is complex, insightful, and radical. The text's ideological structure is not stable. The ending of the novel is disturbing and ambiguous. The last line. So, yeah, Dimala with the wife of Nikhil, but now she has developed some relationship with Sandeep, and because of his interest to militant nationalism, she has come outside of the inner circle. Home and home and work outside home. She is operating outside home. A woman is brought out of the home. Okay. So Bimla is the site for an interpretative contest between two men over the meaning of nation. The novel is an exploration of crisis of masculinity that are then enacted against the figure of the desirable and desiring woman. It is she, not Sandhi, who embodies Swadeshi nationalism and does so in marked sexual terms. My side, the quote from the novel, my side and my mind, my hopes and my desires became red with the passion of this new age. Okay? So now this is where I am stopping. Also, I skip many things. And the next, the next part of lecture, we will take at least 50 20 minutes. I will not go through that. And it is related to the novels which had been influenced by Gandhian ideology. More specifically, I have taken three novels here, Ankushka and Untouchable and that one, Waiting for the Mahatma. So I'm not going to those things because that's the problem. So okay, now I conclude my lecture here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Prakash Chandrapradhan, for the wonderful presentation on nation and narration.
How, how unfortunate and pathetic were the conditions of the people of India during the pre-independence period was highlighted by Dr. Prakash. The torture faced by not we people, the Indians, was also portrayed by Dr. Prakash, and he has taken a lot of pain in analyzing the invasions right from the Mughal period to the British period and how there was a cultural conflict during the British period. According to him, the emergence of national literature was responsible for this independence. You know, uh, we should accept the bold courage of Indians who were able to face such tortures during the pre-independence period. I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Nadu. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Saji, for your wonderful wrapping up. So, the first session we are wrapping up here, and we are breaking for the lunch break. The lunch will be provided next to Sundarnar Hall. Next to Sundarnar Hall in the Commerce Department. We have volunteers to guide you, and you can come back to the Sundarnar Hall downstairs at 2:45 p.m. Okay, come back by 2:45 p.m. Thank you.